I'm Jenika McCrayer. I'm a writer based in New York, and I'm a proud William & Mary alum. I'm so excited to be back home with everybody. Thanks again to Melinda and the Ampersand Film Festival for allowing me to return for a second year to speak about quite possibly my favorite thing of all time, which is horror. As a Black woman, I'm thrilled to discuss how my identity has been reflected in and influenced by so many great Black horror films. And excuse me, during this time we'll spend together, you'll get an overview of the most prolific eras in Black horror and the common themes, tropes, and stereotypes explored in some of the genre's most impactful films. And if you're not already a genre fan, I hope to make you one today. And at the very least, I hope you leave with a greater appreciation of Black horror as a genre and as an invaluable vehicle of Black expression. So I just want to make sure everybody can see my screen. It's good? Great. First, I wanted to congratulate fellow alum Cord Jefferson on winning the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay with American Fiction. And this is timely. American Fiction is a film that lambasts stereotypes and the one-dimensional ways in which Black people are often presented in media and film. And I appreciate this quote that he gave in a post-Oscars interview, because it's true. Black people's trauma and systemic oppression are not the totality of Black life, and our films need to reflect that. Black life is so nuanced and varied, and there's plenty of room on the silver screen for all of our stories. And that's what I love most about Black horror, because it gives us a space to reflect on the different aspects and layers of our struggles through the supernatural and other fantastical elements, and how we can dream and conceptualize any kind of future we want. And horror allows us to explore the monstrosities of being a flawed human. So I really hope Cord explores the horror genre next. Here's a little bit more about me. Like Melinda said, excuse me, I graduated in 2013 with a degree in gender, sexuality, and women's studies. And during my time at the college, I was a proud brother of Alpha Phi Omega's service fraternity, and I was also involved in campus kitchens and club field hockey. I eventually turned my love for community service into a career and was a policy analyst for the city of New York for 6 years. And alongside that, I've been writing and editing since I was 15 when I started as a teen correspondent for the Virginian Pilot. Um, I very recently, as of 2022, turned my writing endeavors into a full-time career. And right now, I'm a columnist for Fangoria magazine, which is one of the longest running horror magazines in the US. And if you know me, I think I have a few friends in the audience, you know this is my dream job. So I'm really excited. I'm also currently the managing editor for Priestess Magazine, a woman of color focused magazine that's going to debut later this spring, which is another dream job. And when so when I'm not thinking or writing about horror, I'm writing about gender, education, and labor organizing. And my favorite Black horror film is the 1995 masterpiece, Tales from the Hood. It's an anthology with stories tackling issues such as domestic abuse, racism, police brutality, and gang violence. And I promise it's more fun than it sounds. So I wanted to start with this because I feel like my workshop, it may differ a little bit from the others included in the industry summit. And I won't spend a lot of time discussing how I've made it in the entertainment industry because, truth be told, I don't feel quite like I've made it just yet. And I'm curious to see if there ever come a time when I feel successful. But I'm happiest right now because I get to do the work I love and share something I love with you all. And this is because of these lessons I've learned through nearly 18 years as a freelance journalist. So hopefully I learned the hard way so you don't have to. And I'm happy to share these lessons with you. So Again, I've only recently done a career pivot to journalism full time in 2022, and my timing honestly could not be worse. But I am adamant that print is not dead and journalism is not dead. And as an entertainment journalist or a film arts journalist, whatever you'd like to call me, I've had to be flexible. The journalism industry is constantly shifting, and the entertainment industry too, in the past couple of years, as we've seen. They're both constantly shifting and evolving, and we've all had to adapt and reinvent ourselves several times as writers and journalists. Flexibility, embracing whatever comes, or the unknown go hand in hand. I quit a full-time policy job to write about horror of all things at a severely low point in journalism, especially entertainment journalism. Right now, there's a lot of panic in the industry over mass layoffs at prestige outlets, the rise of AI and SEO, search engine optimization, and clickbait essays being prioritized over well-researched and well-crafted work, right? I don't regret my decision, but I had to renegotiate with myself what success means to me, right? Writing had is such a big part of my life, but it'd been a side hustle for years. But that didn't make me any less of a writer. I needed to be flexible to fit my writing into my life any way that I could until I could pursue it full time. Um, so your career and your life will take you to unexpected places, and you have to be prepared for that. And I think there's something to be said about reevaluating your ideas of a career and maybe rethinking what that actually looks like, especially for a career in the arts. I personally don't know many other full-time writers or creatives, but that doesn't make them any less of a creative, right? I think the most tangible advice I can give, or you can take away from this workshop, is to just pitch, right? Just pitch your idea. For those of you who don't know, pitching is presenting an idea for an article to a publication in the hopes that they will commission or publish your work. So you need to do your research on what topics you'd like to cover, where your story would be the most appropriate to publish, and what kinds of angles or perspectives those publications publish or are hoping to publish. Most of my published work, I will say, has been something I cold pitched. And that means I didn't have a prior relationship with that publication or the editors before I pitched my idea. And these are some of my favorite cold pitches I wanted to share with you guys. But if you do good work, like the twomps that I know that you are, do you still call each other twomps? You'll find that building a relationship with editors is easy and fulfilling. And at this point in my career, I've been able to turn cold pitches like these into long-lasting relationships. And now my editors will come to me and ask me to write about things within my area of expertise, which is horror, like I said, horror, gender, labor, and I love when I get to blend all three. So my advice to you is to just do it. If you have a passion or an idea, just pitch it to the appropriate outlet and don't let the seeds of doubt take root, right? Don't give up on yourself before you start. Let the editors tell you no, or work with the editors to rework your ideas so it can be published, right? And you may hear no a lot if you hear back at all, but sometimes one yes is all it takes. And for example, I was so scared to pitch this enduring woman article to Fangoria. Like I said, it's the longest running horror magazine in the US since 1979. And for whatever reason, I was intimidated. I never felt like my writing was good or exciting enough, or that I knew enough about the horror genre to be an expert. You know what I mean? The imposter syndrome was definitely killing me. But I pitched it, and the editor liked it so much that they offered me a column in their print magazine. So now I have a column writing about women in horror in Fangoria in print, available at newsstands near you. And I just love this full circle moment because last year at the festival, I mentioned during my workshop on horror, that I dreamed of writing for Fangoria, and now I have my own column, which is awesome. And accomplishing that was a dream come true. But it also made me realize that I might need to continue embracing the unknown and dream bigger. So I'm learning so much right now about what it means to write full time, about horror, and about myself as a writer. And I'm always reading, trying to stay updated with horror trends, recent releases, cultural criticisms, etc. And right now, working on my own horror fiction and reading scripts for movies that I admire. I don't know if I'd ever write a screenplay, but I enjoy the process and being a lifelong learner. And my insatiable thirst for knowledge got me through William and Mary. It's going to get you through too. It's definitely going to make me the writer that I aspire to be. And you don't have to be a horror fanatic or an adrenaline junkie like me to take risks. So definitely take risks, be flexible, and pitch, 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 pitch. So I wanted to take some time, excuse me, before I move on to the fun part, to take questions about a career in journalism right now in this moment. And I'll take questions at the end too, but if you had any like industry related questions, I'd love to hear them.
I would love to know where you get so many of your ideas from in the first place, and what does your writing process look like?
That's a great question. Thank you. And then I'll get to the question in the chat. What is my writing process? How do I get my ideas? Hmm. Basically just watching a lot of horror. Um, most people that know me know that I'm probably watching a horror something at least every day. Black horror, so horror especially is a really political genre. And my background in women and gender studies is really applicable to that. So I'm able to see or view these films through like a cultural lens, racial, gender, sexuality lenses. And that's where I get my ideas. A lot of my ideas focus on women. Um, as you can see in the clips I provided, I'm really interested in women's roles in horrors, not just filmmakers, like behind and in front of the camera too. I like to interview a lot of filmmakers, authors, and other creatives within the horror industry too. That's also a great way to get ideas. My writing process is usually I'll pitch an idea, my editors will be like either great, like go with that, or they'll be like, actually, I want to see this. I want you to focus on that. And then I end up reviewing the films, and like the film that I'm talking about, if I'm talking about just one film or the group of films that I'm talking about, um, how they're related, and just going from there. It takes me about Honestly, it takes about 12 hours to write a full article spread across 2 weeks. I do a lot of research, a lot of research. Liz Bellamy, hi Liz, asked in the chat, how do you deal with trolls, critics of your work? I ignore them. I ignore trolls. They are a very vocal minority. The horror, I mean, we all know horror is aversive and it's toxic. And there could be a lot of toxic fans too. Um, horror, well, women and people of color, queer people are pretty underrepresented in this industry. So I do get a lot of trolls of that nature. And like I said, I just ignore them. Um, all right. So we're gonna get on to the fun stuff. Um, so before I discuss the intricacies of Black horror, I wanted to level set and provide some basic definitions of horror. Horror has, like I said, has always been a political genre that explores themes with which marginalized people are familiar: isolation, ostracization, oppressive forces, villainization, etc. And I enjoy horror because it's transgressive. It pulls back society's shiny veneer to grapple with the monstrous, the grotesque, and the depravity within all of us that we are so afraid to name. Horror tells the truth, and it could not care less if you want to hear it. I think author Isabel Cristina Pinedo offers the most concise criteria for horror films, which I have listed. Like I said, horror is transgressive. It disrupts our everyday world, the status quo, and our boundaries. It mocks rationality and narrative closure. And most obviously, it tries to scare you. So now that we understand what makes a horror film, what makes a horror film Black? So there are distinct differences between horror films with Black people in them and Black horror. The most notable differences are in how these two kinds of films are produced, marketed, the narrative focus, what constitutes the other or the antagonizing forces, and the Black character's chance at survival. So, Black film studies scholar Robin R. Means Coleman noted the differences in her book Horror Noir. Blacks in horror films, and from now on, I will call them just mainstream horror films, are usually marketed as mainstream films and are not likely to have many Black folks behind the camera. Broader societal fears serve as the narrative focus, unlike Black horror, which tends to focus on Blackness and the struggles that come with it. In Black horror, marginalization tends to be the source of tension, right? With antagonists or the threat on screen often being allegorical to systemic oppression that we face every day. And obviously, Black horror is written, directed, and produced by Black filmmakers and marketed to Black audiences. What we see in mainstream horror, the threat or the other is often racially coded. And one of the few stereotypes about horror that is unfortunately true is that Black people in mainstream horror are not making it to the finish line very often. And I don't want to say never, but the odds are pretty slim. Black people's chances of survival are way higher in Black horror. It's not 100%, but a win is a win. Some similarities between these two types of horror movies that feature Black people that I've noticed is that some mainstream horror does comment on race and other kinds of marginalization, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And again, horror has always been political. But I've also noticed that at times in mainstream horror, or horror not solely marketed as Black horror, the Black character or characters add nuance or perspective that can be evaluated through a racialized lens, right? So the character being Black means something, and their Blackness affects the story. I have some examples of the types of both types, as well as where they intersect. Um, So I have some mainstream movies that I consider have some commentary on race, again, whether intentional or not. I think the best and most famous example of where these types intersect is George Romero's 1968 film, Night of the Living Dead. So not only did Romero invent the zombie genre, he said that he, quote, picked the best actor for the role, which happened to be Black actor Dwayne Jones, who's also featured in another film I'll talk about later. Romero is also credited the actor Dwayne Jones for convincing him not to change the ending. So if you somehow have not been blessed to see this movie yet, I won't spoil the ending for you, but I would please love for you to consider the impact of a film released the same year Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, starring a Black man fleeing zombies and trying to survive the night in a house with a bunch of jittery white people. Very impactful. Another and more recent example of this overlap is Girl with All the Gifts, adapted from a novel by white author Mike Carey. In the novel, the titular girl named Melanie is a white blonde child that's immune to a zombie creating pathogen. Melanie and other immune children are used as test subjects to find a cure to the disease, and the casting of Black actress Sanaya Nanua adds a racialized lens to as being used as a guinea pig to advance science, which is very reminiscent of the Tuskegee experiments and the gynecological experiments performed on Black women. I also put both versions of Candyman here, the 1992, I believe, and the 2021 version. So 1992's Candyman, written by Clive Barker, focuses more on the white victim Helen, whereas the 2021 retelling focuses more on the effects of racism and gentrification on Black Chicagoans and is also written and directed by a Black woman, Nia DaCosta. Mm. So, with here are some common themes that are explored within Black horror and mainstream horror with Black people in them. So we have classism and urban decay. I'm also including gentrification in this category as a part of urban decay. We have racism and xenophobia, which are also common tropes. And in this category, you'll also see some exoticism and fetishization of cultures across the African diaspora, such as like Haitian voodoo and hoodoo comes up a lot in horror movies. Other Caribbean cultures and African cultures as well. I will say from an American standpoint, we do tend to other Black folks across the diaspora. We also have vice and violence, movies that deal with intraracial and interracial violence, drug misuse, and violence in Black communities, including, again, intra-community violence like gang violence or external violent perpetrators like the police. We also have faith and family, exploring tensions in family units, challenges to our ideals and beliefs, and ancestral trauma. Enduring women are also prevalent in Black horror. The simplest definition I can give you for enduring women is it's a final girl, but Black. Black final girls are different in that they are often sexualized, unlike their virginal white counterparts, as Black women are often hypersexualized in society. Um, Enduring women are also most often trying to save a man, and there is an understanding that the threat or the other is not over once the antagonist has been defeated. And as a Black woman, we're under constant threat navigating our current society. So it makes sense that a Black woman's work is not done when the credits roll, right? Lastly, I've highlighted racial identity as a theme. And these are films with characters trying to come to terms with their Blackness and what it means to be Black. For example, The Blackening, I highly recommend it. It's a horror comedy. It's really light, but it's also literally about a group of friends and an unknown killer forcing them to play a game to prove just how Black they are, and only the Blackest person will live to see another day. Again, more fun than it sounds. All right. So we're going to move on to reviewing the eras of Black horror. Black horror really had its moment during the 1970s Blaxploitation era. With White Flight of the 1970s and 80s came suburban horror and the explorations of the decaying nuclear family unit. Think Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Hills Have Eyes, Last House on the Left, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I could go on. The 70s was a big moment for horror in general. But the Black horror especially stood out during this time. So we have horror that reflects the civil rights movement, anti-establishment Black Panther rhetoric, and musings on exploitation within the Black community that defined this era. This is also when we start to see enduring women differentiate themselves from the Laurie Strodes and the Nancys of the suburbs. Studios were desperate for the black dollar, and white studios often tried to ride the wave of successful black films. We see this in how execs rushed to make the low budget and honestly low effort Blackenstein in the wake of Blackula's success. That's also something of this era. It was just like monsters, but black. And up here we have Ganja and Hess. It was critically acclaimed and screened at Cannes Film Festival, but the producers were upset because they wanted a more black version of a white vampire film, and they didn't appreciate the avant-garde nature of Ganja and Hess, which I highly recommend. So producers ended up withdrawing the film from distribution and selling it to another company, which renamed it Blood Couple, hoping to capitalize on a more straightforward blaxploitation film. They also chopped it up as well, so that version doesn't really make a lot of sense. The original cut of Ganja and Hess is the only version the late writer and director William Gunn has ever acknowledged, and it was thankfully donated to the Museum of Modern Art, which cemented its status as a cult classic. And of this era, this movie is a must-see. It's for its complex Black characters, during an era in American cinema that produced far too many Black caricatures for white audiences. Next, we have the 80s, also a decade without Black horror. The 80s can be viewed as the era that Black people didn't exist. Thank you, Reagan. But again, at this time, mainstream horror villains were hyperfixated on terrorizing cul-de-sac dwellers. More stereotypical depictions of Black people in horror are present, though, including saviors, sacrificial Negroes, and magical Negroes. So when you think of sacrificial Negroes or magical Negroes, you can think of Richard Halloran in The Shining. And unfortunately, Stephen King loves a magical Negro. And there isn't really much to note during this decade, but Michael Jackson's Thriller is credited with bringing horror more into the mainstream, which I thought was a fun fact. Thankfully, there is a resurgence in Black horror in the 90s. Remember, this is the decade my favorite film, Tales from the Hood, was released. And you see other films in the similar vein. So in the 90s, we see depictions of both urban and suburban Black life with musings on family dynamics, faith, gentrification, it's always gentrification, racism, and police brutality. We also see mainstream franchises introduce Black or Hood installments in the 90s and early 2000s. So we can think of Children of the Corn 3, which was in an urban setting, or how Leprechaun went back to the hood twice. Again, 2000s, we see a continuation of hood or urban horror. And just think, before Ice Cube did family movies, he did horror movies, along with Snoop Dogg, LL Cool J, and Busta Rhymes. I might be dating myself too. And I think they all survived too, which is amazing. We also saw the late singer Aaliyah in Anne Rice's Queen of the Damned. Urban decay, still an issue in 2000s horror and presently. We also see themes of vice and substance abuse, gangs, violence, and police brutality. And the rise of home video led to most of these films' financial success and cult following. And that brings us up to today. Where are we today? I would argue, and I hope I've proven, that horror has always been political or woke, but this current era is marked by an uptick in horror that directly confronts the issue of racism, thanks to Get Out. We also see more movies by Black filmmakers that center the Black experience and offer many facets of Black life besides terror. We also see more Black filmmakers reimagining mainstream films, such as 2021's Candyman, like I mentioned, and the HBO series Lovecraft Country, which is loosely based on a novel by the same name by white author Matt Ruff. But much like the original Blaxploitation era, this woke era has studios looking to make a quick buck on Black trauma, often at our expense. I'll take a moment to read this quote from this really amazing article on Black horror, as it pretty much encapsulates what is happening within the horror industry at this moment. So, the genre, to be sure, has a fine line to walk. To capitalize on people's suffering can easily become misery tourism, turning pain into ticket sales and forcing Black viewers to relive trauma, whether personal or ancestral, for the sake of entertainment. Very succinct, love it. Exploitation is not new, but what stands out to me in this current moment is how some some movies are marketed to Black audiences, but still unfortunately center white audiences or the white gaze. Often these movies feel like an explainer or how-to guide on what Black people go through, rather than a thoughtful or insightful or an authentic insight into Black life. This is 2021's Karen, which was marketed as a Black film, but is pretty much about a white woman named Karen who terrorizes a Black couple who moved into her neighborhood. And I did not want to leave you on that note. So I would rather much leave you with these Black horror recommendations. I recommend all of the films featured, honestly, but these four are some of my favorite. They've crafted with love by incredible Black filmmakers, and they each deserve their due. So we have Nope by Jordan Peele. I think that's the best of the current Jordan Peele trilogy. We have Ganjan Hess, a beautiful experimental avant-garde film using vampirism as a metaphor for substance misuse. His House reflects on immigration, xenophobia, and racism. And The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster is an amazing retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and it's very inventive. I love it. So yes, thanks y'all. That's all I had for you today. Thanks for spending your time with me. I'm so happy to be back home, and I'd love to take more questions.